Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we're going to go over the recent warrior I leveled in Solo Self-Found. I took it from level 1 all the way to a +2 difficulty tier 15 boss in about 1 day's worth of playtime. You must be wondering, but why? Isn't warrior bad? Doesn't SSF suck? Well, in my experience, it's okay. Good enough, one could say. But the main reason I decided to restart an SSF is I am not the biggest fan of the trade economy currently, and I'm not very much of a fan of the current endgame as well. It's a little lacking, but that's entirely understandable in a closed beta. There's a lot of dupes going on in the trade economy, there's a lot of shenanigans going on, and I don't want it to detract from what really matters, me testing builds. The real reason I am doing this is because I want to play a lot of different builds and classes and familiarize myself with everything we have to offer in PoE 2 currently before we end up getting more content like all the other classes and ascendancies, right? So I am going to be going over a bunch of these 0 to hero runs in the future as I figure out what I enjoy in Path of Exile 2. Now, this first one is going to be a Titan Earthquake build. The idea is to utilize Earthquake, a gem you can actually get at level 2. I actually enjoyed my time with it. It's what we use at the moment after we kill the Miller on the starting beach all the way into endgame. Earthquake is a slam skill that has an aftershock mechanic attached to it. The idea is we slam the ground and create a jagged ground effect. This slows enemies while they're on it to a pretty decent degree also. Then after the end of the duration of the patch, which is 4 seconds by the way at base, it will do an aftershock which scales much harder than the initial hit and deals damage in a much larger area. We can reduce the duration of these jagged grounds to make our earthquake hit much quicker, which will improve our clear significantly. The aftershocks themselves can be modified by getting extra chance to aftershock with slams on the passive tree and support gems. That is the bulk of what I had planned with this character to do. We also utilize Hammer of the Gods as an extra piece for single target, as it would be really dumb not to use that in a build that utilizes a hammer currently. Kind of feels like an auto include, to be honest with you. But with all that out of the way, if you haven't already, I would heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel if you like content like this, as that's the best way of currently supporting me on YouTube and to show me that you want more stuff just like this. So here we are in Act 1 on the beach. So currently we're going to be utilizing Mace Strike to kill stuff on the beach. One thing I noticed, it's actually kind of worth killing stuff, like killing enemies on the beach, as getting a small amount of evasion or armor is pretty desirable, as even a piece that gives you 20 evasion is like literally 20% evasion right now. So here's the Bloated Miller. We just punch him to death. We don't utilize Rolling Slam that often because Rolling Slam is just a really bad skill. I really don't know why Rolling Slam is in the current state that it is. Usually skills that have total attack time slammed onto them, the idea would be that they do enough damage to merit this total attack speed, which Rolling Slam definitely does not. Like for instance, Lightning Conduit does plenty of damage to merit its total attack cast time. So I don't know what's going on with that, but yeah, right here, we just use basic attack. Thankfully, this is the only time we have to do this in the entire game, as we can get Earthquake right after this, as you can see. So as you can see, we're just dodging enemies, and we're just simply using that basic attack. I use Rolling Slam once on this character. Cool. So here we are getting our first skill gem here. We immediately grab Earthquake as it is significantly better than Rolling Slam. Yeah, get that fucking shit out of here. Fuck Rolling Slam, dude. But yeah, the idea here is we're actually waiting for Renly to move over to the other side here so that we can actually buy a two-handed mace. The idea is to try to sell all of your belongings and try to get a two-handed mace. It's actually why we kill stuff on the beach, as we really want a two-handed mace with Earthquake. We do not want to be utilizing a one-handed weapon and Earthquake early on. We want to use a two-handed mace because of what we're trying to accomplish. The idea is we utilize it as a little bit of extra damage early on top of a different skill, which we'll be getting in a moment. But let's explain Earthquake for people who don't understand. The idea is we put down a jagged ground patch. The problem with Earthquake here is if you try to place a jagged ground patch on top of the other jagged ground patch, it won't actually add another, which means you're essentially wasting all of your attack speed. Like right there, I did not create another one, which is a big issue. So aiming your aftershocks is pretty much one of the biggest things ever in this build. Now, of course, we grabbed Frostbomb. Why did we grab that? We're not a spell build. Well, Frostbomb not only has an absurd amount of damage at level 1, it also just is a cooldown skill that just does all its damage up front, and all we have to do is just put it down and then cast our Frostbomb. Like put down our Earthquake, put down our Frostbomb, good to go, slam. So we slam enemies and then we put our Frostbomb on them, because when we slam the enemies, the jagged gun gets created, and then we put down the Frostbomb on the enemy as well to deal massive amounts of damage, as you can see. Kind of a neat combo early on, just until we can get access to some other gems. I found that this is better than trying to utilize Mace Strike. A lot of people are utilizing Mace Strike on top of utilizing Earthquake or whatever, but I found that this is much better, as it allows me to actually dodge things, unlike I was doing in the footage. But the idea is we hit them with Earthquake, we hit them with Frostbomb, and we just simply dodge in between. As you can see, we actually do plenty of damage. This is with a white hammer as well, by the way. So we have a white hammer with Earthquake and Frostbomb here, doing plenty of damage. Now here, it gets a little squishy here and there. That's like one problem early on, is since you're utilizing a two-hander, you don't have like access to block, you're going to be a little squishy. But really, it's really nice just being able to run Frostbomb on top of Earthquake this early on, as it just simply helps us clear stuff way quicker in the early game, specifically bosses. So we're waiting for her to die. There you go. Now here's the Devourer. The Devourer actually goes as quick as possible as well. As you can see, we actually just put down Frost Bombs down on him, and we put down Earthquakes while also avoiding his moves. Like for instance here, if we were trying to utilize Mace Strike, we would be really near the enemy and taking a bunch of damage for no reason. But with this version, we can just simply walk around him and try to dodge his abilities while also not taking damage. Here, you know, we can also place down Frost Bombs and Earthquakes while we're waiting for him to appear there. Like, it feels a lot better than trying to utilize Mace Strike, let me tell you. I did a bunch of mock leveling runs from level 1 to Act 3 with a bunch of different Earthquake setups, and this was the easiest setup I found. All right, here we are finally killing the Devourer here. About to kill him here. Also, freeze on the Frost Bomb just feels really good. Just getting access to freeze and stun as double CC early on just makes it so that, you know, we can kill bosses quickly. What's really annoying though is the Devourer just moving around a bunch. That is very annoying, but whatever. We're about to kill him here. Great. Now we can get our first support gem from Renly. Now what we're going to utilize for our first support gem is literally what we're going to do is run reduced duration on Earthquake. This fast forward. This makes it so that we can actually clear with Earthquake in a good fashion. The problem is 4 seconds is a very long time, and enemies will kind of like walk out of your Earthquake, and that's not what you want at all. Like, that is not what we want. We don't want enemies to move out of our Earthquake. As you can see here, if I end up actually swinging at things here in a moment, you'll actually be able to see that Earthquake goes off fast enough now that it doesn't feel like Papega. Later on, we're actually going to invest a lot more into reduced skill effect duration to make it even better. Here, like I said, we still use the Frost Bomb plus Earthquake tech, and we keep, you know, going down through this. Now, what's really nice about the Frostbomb Earthquake tech on level 1 or whatever is it actually makes your clear a lot better than it like normally would be as a warrior at this point. Like, there's pretty much just no reason not to put Frostbomb on your bar early on, as it's just such a good skill early on. It's like so insanely good. Now, here's the Rust King. We're going to pretty much kill him the same way that we kill the Devourer. Just put down that Frostbomb, put down the Earthquakes. Now, like I said, this is the boss where you can see where my management of putting down my Jagged Grounds is not the best. If you actually manage your Jagged Grounds properly, you can do pretty well with Earthquake. The biggest problem is it actually scales with area, your jagged ground. The bigger your area on jagged ground, the easier it is to accidentally click on the same jagged ground that you're putting there. Also, as well, there's a kind of a weird, annoying thing where the warrior or just the characters in general will auto target enemies. And the problem is you kind of don't want to do that with warrior or just earthquake in general. I'm sorry. Because the idea here is you're trying to put down a bunch of patches of jagged ground, but you want to put them away from each other so that they don't overlap, so you don't lose attacks. And that's a big problem. As you can see here, I die, of course. But being able to put down multiple patches in like kind of a small area and having them overlap at a boss is how we actually do our single target. So what we end up doing later on is we actually want to reduce our area, which reduces the jagged ground size, which allows us to more tightly place our jagged grounds together. But yeah, that's like the biggest issue I found with this early on is jagged ground placement. So here's the Rotten Druid boss, another boss on the way to the end game here. So you actually want to kill the Rotten Druid as he gives you a support gem. This support gem is very important for our setup. As you can see, I actually got super lucky and dropped a rare oak hammer with decent stats. Any good two-hander early on with a bunch of stats on it is just immediately going to catapult your damage into like the stratosphere. But the idea with this support gem is we're trying to make Earthquake actually do damage. The biggest problem early on is since you're actually like kind of like removing a whole gem just to reduce the duration of Earthquake, you do lack a little bit of damage on the hit portion of Earthquake. Now, of course, that's just the warrior tax. It just seems like warrior is just taxed, just a little bit more than all the other classes in terms of quality of life and stuff like that. All right, this is where I get Infernal Cry. Infernal Cry, the way it works is it gives you a bunch of damage added as extra fire based on the power of enemies nearby when you use it. So, for instance, if you use it near a unique, you'll get a total of 100% of damage added as fire. This just gives you a lot of extra damage on single target. Not only that, but it can also make it so enemies can explode, dealing fire damage based on the skill level of the gem. That helps a lot as it just helps with our clear a little bit. But this is like when we drop Frostbomb. The reason why we drop Frostbomb is because we can't scale the intelligence with it. So it's just not worth using it. But pretty much Infernal Cry plus Earthquake right now should be good enough. For that support gem that you're supposed to be using by now, I would suggest running Fire Infusion instead. Fire Infusion is the best choice, I believe, out of all of them, mainly because it doesn't reduce your area like Conk Effect, as you don't want that. It doesn't reduce your added as fire from Infernal Cry, like, of course, the added cold would do, or the added lightning. So overall, I think added fire is the way to go in terms of a damage support for Earthquake early on. So I actually got a little lucky here. I dropped another support gem, and if you do end up dropping another support gem, I would suggest grabbing Premeditation for your Infernal Cry, as it's just another 15% more damage for your attacks when they are empowered, which is just great early on. All right, now we're in the Asinia fight. This should be pretty easy considering the mace that we got earlier from the Druid and all of the support gems we got. We should be able to clean it up pretty quickly. We do plenty of damage for this point. One thing I would suggest with this is stay near Asinia. You don't want to be away from her in this regard. You want to be near her and put on the pressure. As you can see, that was a big bonk. That was from our Infernal Cry doing a bunch of damage. You do need to make sure that your Infernal Cry hits the boss because it needs to be in range to give you the damage. You can also mainly so the hit itself of the earthquake can actually do damage just as much as the big explosion as well. What that means is you do want to actually hit him with the initial hit and the explosion at the end if you're utilizing the war cry with the earthquake there. All right, now here's Draven. One very big tip for Draven here is you see that little circle in the middle where he like pops out of? It's actually terrain that he can't move over, including you. This is very big. This means that you can kind of like kite him around, ring around the rosy per se with him. You want to like kind of put your earthquakes around him, like kind of around the circle and hit him with the range and kind of play ring around the rosy with them. It makes the fight go from awful because of the way that his auto attacks push you to just pretty much easy thanks to all of that. All right, here's Lachlan. Now, one tip I will say about Lachlan is you want to stay near him. The reason why is he has this really annoying attack where he like sunders you off screen, and that can pretty much one tap you at this point. Uh, but to stay near him, what you need to do is you need to dash sideways instead of forwards or backwards when it comes to the slam. So he slams you in front and then slams behind him. And you want to dash left or right when he does that instead of like dashing away. It's like the better way of going about it. But with Earthquake and Infernal Cry dumping our damage, it makes Lachlan actually pretty easy for a melee build, which is great. While we're killing the Crowbell here, let me give you guys some tips about leveling Warrior early on. From what I've seen, you mainly want to just get a really good weapon. That's really all you need in the early game. Put on some evasion pieces as well. Armor and evasion. Make sure you can wear those armor and evasion pieces, as evasion just makes you feel so much better. It doesn't matter that you're a warrior. You want to evade the really annoying auto attacks that enemies have while you're clearing and stuff. That helps a lot, just having just a little bit of evasion. But mainly you want to be looking for a good weapon. You want to focus all of your efforts on getting a decent weapon. That is literally all that matters early on, to be honest. Like doing enough damage just helps out so much, as just killing stuff turns out just makes the game feel that much more pleasurable. So make sure you're picking up white bases and slamming them with your transmutes and stuff like that, getting ready for regals and stuff like that. Make sure you are actually picking up weapons and crafting on them, specifically two-handed maces for this build, as otherwise you will end up behind the curve. Pretty much, if you've crafted a weapon and you've gone like 2 zones ahead, you are behind the curve. You need to make sure that you're constantly upgrading your weapon, as your weapon is like the most important thing. One thing I would suggest, I would suggest going to PoE 2 DB and looking for all of the two-handed hammers and finding the levels that they require, because once you reach that certain level, they'll actually start showing up in the shop. And the shop is a like pretty much the vast majority of a lot of your gear in the early game. You are meant to buy gear from vendors. Pretty much, you're not only meant to craft gear, you're meant to look at the vendor, see if they have a two-handed weapon that actually fits what you need, and then craft on that, buy it, yada yada yada. So you want to make sure that you're selling blue items, because selling blue items means you can have enough gold to buy those things from the vendor. But make sure, of course, that you are actually disenchanting your rares, because getting regals is really annoying early on, and it's what unlocks you to have a 2 at like a 2 prefix weapon, and 2 prefixes on a weapon is ultimately way better than 1 prefix weapon. So you really want to get that 3rd prefix eventually, with of course like percent fizz mainly, or even a flat damage can work. All right, now we're doing the Executioner. This boss is actually kind of annoying for this build, mainly because he has a lot of melee abilities that make you not want to stand near him, but you do need to stand near him to apply your earthquakes. Also, as well, his main melee attack, that one that like he swings back and forth, it's very just obnoxious in general. It pushes you back constantly, and I'll be honest, I think it's like one of the worst things about the game right now. If I were to like think about things that I don't like, is enemies' tendencies to actually move you like physically. The reason why I don't like it is because it just feels so jarring, if that makes sense. Like it feels jarring to have your character move and your like where you're looking at moved. Like it just does not feel good. And especially as a melee build. Like the biggest problem is this mainly affects melee, because like you're not going to be like getting moved that much while you're a range build, because you know you're not near them. So I don't know why they added this one extra thing where the enemy has to like move you as he's doing damage to you in some ways. Like they couldn't just have like phasing or whatever. Just really weird and awkward. I just don't understand it personally myself. One thing I will say is make sure you actually do your King of the Mists before you go to the Count. That is because all of the enemies near the Count, like in Act 1, they're just really obnoxious and nasty. They do very large amounts of physical damage and they like to pile onto you. So I would heavily suggest getting your spirit gem and focusing on getting a Herald of Ash, as that will improve your clear significantly. All right, so here's our King of the Mist going down here. We do just so much damage at this point with Earthquake, it just feels really good. I was told that Perfect Strike is a better skill for single target, but I really did not like it when I utilized it. But if you feel like you want to two-shot the boss, I would suggest trying Perfect Strike personally. I didn't really understand how good it was until I started using it in a different character, but like overall, like I just like Earthquake way better. So here we're actually going to be grabbing Herald of Ash. That is very important, as Herald of Ash does like an explosion based on the overkill damage you do to an enemy. I would make sure to grab the Cold Res Charm from Finn. The reason why you grab the Cold Res Charm from Finn, as the Count does a lot of cold damage. Make sure you try to grab as much cold resistance as possible on your gear before you deal with the Count, because he does lots of cold damage. But yeah, Herald of Ash before we go up to the Count. Now, to give you an idea of why we want Herald of Ash before this, is it just improves our clear significantly. As you can see, when we actually get some overkills, the clearing potential thanks to Herald of Ash just helps so much. And also, who doesn't love bunch of fiery explosions, right? Now, one thing that's a little sad though is the Herald of Ash explosions. They apply an ignite based on the overkill damage to nearby enemies. And the problem with this is it's a duration based thing, right? It's duration based. That's a bit of a problem because we're kind of in the market to reduce the duration that our earthquake has. And to do that, we have to grab reduced duration nodes on the tree. And that makes it a little bit awkward in endgame, but Herald of Ash is just so good, it doesn't matter that we end up reducing its, it doesn't really matter. At least I'm pretty sure it reduces the damage. Maybe it does the same amount of damage over the duration based on like if you reduce the duration, it makes the damage go faster. Maybe that's the case. Maybe that's how it works. I'll be honest, I didn't test and I'm like way too lazy to test. Like that's such a niche thing that it doesn't matter, especially unless if you're like doing like the overkill shenanigans like people are doing with the walls and all that. But like that's like whatever here nor there. Now, I'm actually going to let you guys watch the whole fight of Count Geonor, mainly because I want you guys to be able to see like what I end up doing, what how I fight him specifically to make him easier. I actually do him in one shot here, as I'm pretty good at Geonor now after fighting him a bunch of times. But I'm gonna be quiet. I'm gonna turn on some music, and you guys can just watch me kill Count Geonor here. Act 2. I actually like Act 2 a lot. I don't like specific bosses in Act 2, like Jamin-Ra. I don't like him. And I don't like the Dreadnought area in general. I think a lot of people dislike the Dreadnought area, but the rest of Act 2 is pretty fun. I enjoy it. But I will say the Goliath boss in the Titan area, some people don't like that boss. He's got a lot of HP. Like, I really like, a lot of people dislike him because his HP bar is so high. Now, one little tip I would suggest though is look out for anything that says life gain on kill. This is very strong with this kind of build because it means we don't have to spam our flasks constantly when we're trying to just sustain our life while clearing, as life on kill means we don't have to use our life flasks as often, which just feels great. As you can see, I take damage, but like the moment I kill anything, like my HP goes back to top. Now here's Wrathbreaker. Wrathbreaker is a fun fight. One thing I would suggest is make sure you move immediately. Immediately move to the edge of the area here and try to fight Wrathbreaker. Like mono e mono, like melee range. Do not try to fight him in like range combat. Like do not let him get to the other side of the screen. That's so important to making this fight feel a lot better. It feels a little cheesy, I will say, but it's definitely the way to go, in my opinion, is to try to stay near him and not die to that, obviously. Stay near him, not die to that, and dodge him, and do not go to the other side, because otherwise you're going to get a bunch of spears in your face, and you're also going to have him rushing, and that rushing move is just obnoxious, right? You generally want to stay near him. All right, here's Wrathbreaker down. This time, of course, I actually dodged like I was supposed to. But as you can see, I actually haven't used that much of my life pot. That's because we do a lot of damage with Earthquake. That's because a lot of our nodes early on is just a bunch of percent damage. This little wheel here, like the little wheel where you get a bunch of percent damage with two-handers, you want to grab all of that because it's just all really good percent damage. Fuck this boss. Fuck this boss so much. I hate it. I hate it so much. Remove it from the game. I hate it so much. I hate how she chases you with the stupid propane tank. It hurts so much. It does so much fire damage for no reason, especially early on when you're not expected to have fire res because you're just not expected to have that much resistance on your gear in general. So having a fire damage one shot in the game like this, it just pretty much insulting, I'll be honest, to our intelligence. I really do not like this. Watch here. I barely live that. Like, really? Really, dude? Really? Fuck this boss. Now, one thing that's important that around this time is to grab the Aftershock area node. It increases your EP by 20 inches. It feels amazing. Like, it feels so fucking good to get that increased area because we can't run magnified effect right now because it would like kind of cuck our damage. So having that extra increased area on the tree not only increases your single target DPS uptime, as your aftershocks are all hitting the target consistently, but it also just makes your clear buttery smooth. Like literally, guys, like this node, it like makes my penis hard. Like it's great. It's like I'm not even afraid of my love for this aftershock node. It's just it's just so fucking good. Such a large amount of area in a small package. Like look at that. Now, before I coom, I should probably talk about what we do with Balbala. I heavily suggest to not fight Balbala the traitor, the chick that gives you the key to do the Sekima, until you're actually ready to do the Trial of Sekima. The reasoning I have for this is because trying to fight her on level with Earthquake is ball busting. If you are in 2 CBT, sure, go right ahead. But Balbala is just ball busting, like with this build, because you'll place down your Earthquake, she'll move out of the AoE, and you're like, I'll get her down to 50% by rushing her down, and then 5 minutes will pass, and I'll be like, wait, why isn't she dead? What the hell, dude? I was like, she's still at 50%. It's because she just moves out of every single Earthquake, and it's just so obnoxious. It's not something I would suggest doing until later. Also, as well, our ascendancy points aren't that strong that it matters that we want to actually kill her that early. Like, it doesn't matter. You can just come later when you feel like you're over leveled from the zone and then come back and kill her later. Like, there's nothing wrong with over leveling the trial stuff, anyways. It's balanced as if you do that, anyways. So you might as well do it. And of course, I go against my wisdom and I do attack her. Thankfully, I'm tanky enough for it, but holy crap, is it really annoying. I think I'm actually kissing my wife here goodbye as she had to go to work here, which is good because I don't want her to see me crying after killing Balbala after like 50 fucking years. It's great. This boss is so much fun with Earthquake. So much fun. Now, this area doesn't matter too much, the Holani Gates. One thing I will say, though, is you can actually accidentally forget to leash the Sekima chick with you. The problem with this is Asala, she'll actually target an enemy and try to attack them, right? Or whatever. And you can move on without her, and she won't teleport to your location, which means that you can get all the way to the end of the Holani Gates area and be like, why can't I enter this zone? Oh, wait, it's because Asala is like fucking 20 screens away at the beginning. I had that happen with me on day one of the game launching on December 6th. So don't let that happen. That was just fucking hilarious, dude. So make sure she's actually following you. If you press tab, you can actually see the little yellow X. It's great. Okay, here's Jamin Ra B1. This fight isn't that hard, especially once you realize the attack pattern. He will attack 3 times and then 2 times. As long as you dodge those constantly, you should be fine in this fight. So he'll like go like, I'm gonna swing at you 3 times in a row. As long as you remember that, he's like not that difficult. Of course, just a bunch of trash. Although I noticed this trash specifically is just like kind of tanky. Like these trash mobs, I don't know why they're so tanky, but like whatever. And then like he'll go away, of course, right? All right, here's Kalbala Constrictor Queen in the Keth area. She's actually a really good DPS test for your character. If you're killing her about as fast as my character is right now, it means that you have a decent build. I've noticed that over the past few times I've actually played the game in general, especially because I've done a bunch of warrior leveling runs at this point. I think I've done it like 6 all the way to Act 3 because I wanted to test to find a good way to like level his earthquake for the video, right? But if you do decent damage to Kabbalah here, like if it's very similar, then you have a decent build, my friend. I found that a good indicator of whether a build is going to fail early on while leveling is how much damage I'm actually doing to Kabbalah as I get to her. If I'm doing poo-poo damage, it's probably a good sign that the build is going to be re-rolled very soon. So just kind of interesting that I found that out. Yeah, Kabbalah, pretty good DPS check, all things considered. All right, now everyone just sit there and laugh at me. I tried to play Leap Slam early on. I was just curious. I was like fucking around a little bit, and it turns out Leap Slam, I just really hate it. It was not good at all. You'll see in this footage that I'll be testing Leap Slam a bunch. Just play Earthquake. Earthquake's so much better than this early on. Leap Slam is a cool skill, just not early on. It's a much better skill later on. Do not play Leap Slam early. Make sure to play Earthquake up to this point. Do not try to play Leap Slam. I was trying to play this. It just wasn't good enough. It was terrible early on. I would not play it early on. Oh God, I just regret this so much because I spent like an hour, I think, trying to make Leap Slam function. It just felt so fucking bad. All right, here's Ichabod Crane and his stupid fucking steed here. Earthquake's actually pretty good for dealing with these two chuckleheads, as EQ hits large enough screen that you can actually do damage to them both at the same time. EQ is actually pretty good for multi-boss fights. Like for instance, the floor 2 boss in the Sanctum dies pretty quickly when you're playing an EQ build because you just hit both of them at the same time. As you can see here, that lightning orb thing, this thing, I hate it so much. I can't tell you and I can't begin to explain how much I hate that lightning, like the lightning ball in the middle where it shoots out a bunch of projectiles. This thing. I don't know why, but I hate it so much. Like my burning rage for it is so high. I don't know why I hate it. It just likes to like it keeps me up at night. It's so I just hate it so much. Now, this zone here with the all the falling skeletons, the tornadoes, all of the stupid rock things and the dune worms specifically, if you feel like as though you want to like off yourself after doing this specific part of the campaign, don't worry. We all go through it. I went and talked with a bunch of people I trust and respect the community, and they all hate this zone too. It all sucks. So, just in general, everyone hates this zone. It's not just you. It's okay. We understand. We all hate this zone. If you feel like you're having a terrible time in this zone, trust me, you're not the only one. We all hate it too. Like, it's not just you. Like, we all hate this zone. This zone sucks. Not only is it really big, right? It also just has really annoying mob types. Specifically for this build, those little worms, they just move out of your earthquakes too quickly and it just feels awful, especially if you get a rare one and it just like follows you throughout the half across the map. Just not a pleasant experience at all. Like I don't know why, it just feels unpleasant to play. So, it's okay. We all go through this. Okay, here's the boss everyone hates. I hate him a little less than other people do, but I can understand why people hate him. Mainly because for some reason, I actually compared this by the way. Uh, he has just an absolute absurd amount of HP. Not only that, he also cucks builds kind of like mine, where you put the earthquake near him. It's very awkward for builds that like need to get in melee range. And there's like a few problems with this boss. I don't hate him as much, but I can understand why other people hate them, and I feel for them. I understand completely. So it's moments like these that I'm happy that I am like that we scale evasion armor early on. I would heavily suggest grabbing armor evasion pieces, not just armor, as it makes it so that you just deal with a lot less bullshit in general. I think I think people are stuck in PoE 1 where they think like, "Oh, I'm a big bulky warrior. I can't use this stupid stinky evasion piece of gear." Completely forget all your preconceived notions about that kind of stuff and just put on an evasion armor piece. Trust me, having like 20 to 30% evasion while doing the campaign is like a life-saving like thing. Like even if you have like 200 extra ES as like a warrior or whatever, stuff like that, it helps so much just having just that tinge amount of evasion because armor isn't that good. It's good enough. It's good enough in the campaign. You can like facing some bosses with it in the campaign, by the way, not in endgame. In the endgame, armor kind of sucks, but like early on, you want to have a little bit of evasion. Just a little bit of a tip that I have for you guys. Now, here's the tip I was talking about earlier. When it comes to PoE 2DB, you want to figure out when you're going to get your upgrades as a weapon build. As you can see here with the hammer, the Temple Maul, this is like really strong, but you don't get it from vendors until level 28, right? Level 28, you don't get it. That's crazy to me that you don't get it till then. Like it's just really crazy, but like it's really good. So you want to make sure you get it as early as possible when it comes to like this kind of run because like it's just like getting your weapon upgrades is so important, but the problem is you end up with like the same weapon for like the same 10 levels at this point. So like I think in like Act 2, I end up like having the same weapon for such a long time. It's just low key obnoxious. So being able to upgrade a weapon, like, so important. So fucking important. All right, here's Torgul the Diddler. He's actually pretty easy, all things considered, because you just simply put down Earthquake, move around, put down Earthquake. This is what I mean about the jagged ground management. It's so important for bosses like this because you want to just slam your Earthquake down as much as possible, especially when you're trying to get really good Earthquakes off, like with Infernal Cry and stuff like that. Now, another tip I would like to say is you get jagged ground patches as you level. You get maximum amounts. So right now I have 2 jagged ground patches, if I'm not mistaken, and then eventually at like level 10 or something like that, you get your third jagged ground patch. Then at like level 16 gems, you get your fourth jagged ground patch. And that's really important to know because it lets you know how many patches you can have down at once. As you reduce the duration of the skill, it means you can have more out. And of course, as well, with quality, you can increase that number, and that will get way more important as you start scaling attack speed. Okay, here we are in the best zone in the entire game. Totally. Uh, so this is where that life gain on kill becomes significantly more relevant, as just being able to not die instantly as you're flying through enemies is very important. As a melee build, especially a delayed melee build like Earthquake with slow attack speed for the most part, this is a really bad time. Now, one thing I would heavily suggest at this point is instead of running a DPS support in your links, I would suggest to run martial tempo. So you'd run reduced duration and martial tempo. This will make it so that your hammer swings faster so that you don't instantly die. As you can see here, trying to find a way to improve my DPS, and we did hit the flat melee, flat fizz on that. As you can see, I'm also dying trying to craft, but thankfully I leveled. But yeah, overall, just feels really bad to go through the zone. One thing I will suggest as a tip as well is I would heavily suggest teleporting out and going back to town as much as you need it, because sometimes you'll be far away from a checkpoint and you'll have no flasks. This is normal on the Dreadnought. It's just worth to just go and, of course, go back to town, refill your flask instead of having to go do the walk of shame with the checkpoint again, right? It's much better TP out, fill up your flask, come back in, then kill more monsters. It's like much better than like just trying to ego your way through it, because everything does large amounts of fizz damage. Everything does large amounts of just damage in general. They stun you. It's so much better if you just go back to town every so often. Like, trust me, it's just so much better. And of course, after the best zone in the campaign, we have the best boss in the campaign, Jamin Ra. I have a weird feeling with him. I like him as a boss, but there's one specific thing I really dislike. So he does very large amounts of lightning damage with those spears, as you can see, and it just does a number on anyone if you're just standing still for a second. I I am not like the best at video games, I'll be honest with you. Those spears, they fuck me up all the time, and it makes me hate, and I mean hate, this part of the campaign. Just those lightning spears. I hate them so much. But like I said before, I'm just going to let you guys like watch the whole boss fight so that you guys can get an understanding of what it's supposed to look like. How does it feel? How much damage am I doing versus how much damage you're doing? Here, let's watch the whole thing, shall we? Now we're in Act 3. Act 3, we actually get our fourth support gem here. We get a access to either increased area of effect or a concentrated area of effect here. I actually forgot to put on conk effect, so I actually have increased area of effect, should be conk effect, which would lead to, of course, more damage, obviously, especially on this boss. This boss is just always annoying. Such a fun fight. It's like fun but annoying at the same time. It's weird. It's like such a weird experience this fight is. I'll be honest with you. But yeah, Act 3. Act 3 is just long. It's not like hard or anything. Like the only thing that I would say would be hard is Utsul, which is the area before Viper. And usually it's just because it's just kind of a long zone with very fizz damage oriented enemies. Turns out fizz damage and the ability to, diminish it is very hard in the game currently. It's very hard to diminish fizz damage. As you can see here, just grabbing a bunch of extra passives, going towards those the mace nodes to get just a bunch of percent damage there. Like the only problem I have with this act is you end up just running around a bunch, just in general. Like you just run around a bunch with little to no access to actual amounts of movement speed. Like you can run movement speed on your boots, but that's about it. That's like the biggest problem with Act 3 is it's just so expansive and confusing because it's like a maze, right? It's just like, and it's a lot of running around trying to find waypoints and stuff like that, and making sure you can progress. It's an interesting zone for sure, like interesting act in general, right? Okay, here's Ignaduck. Ignaduck actually was very frustrating on this build, kind of for this all the same reasons that Balbala was annoying in general. Just really, really, really obnoxious because she just moves around a bunch and you're trying to earthquake her down. My build wasn't doing as much damage as it should at this point. There's just like a lot of different reasons why this fight was really just obnoxious. And I'll be honest, you don't really need the spirit at this point. There's not that many spirit gems that actually help you that much. The only one that actually matters the most is, of course, Wind Dancer, giving you that massive like 40% evasion. But like early on, it's not that big of a deal. So if you like decide to like go and do more stuff and then come back to Ignaduck, not necessarily a terrible idea. I ended up just putting a bunch of support gems on my Herald of Ash, like the 1% regen and stuff like that, and clarity, because like it just didn't feel like it was worth actually trying to find a actual gem to put in there instead. All right, so here's the Chimera boss. Turns out this boss is a lot easier when you actually understand what you're supposed to do here. So if you don't know, when he jumps on one of those pillars, you're supposed to actually punch the pillar and kill it, and that means that he'll actually not be able to go on that pillar anymore. And that helps immensely because it means he doesn't spend that long in the air anymore, which means you can actually kill him properly, which is great. The only thing that's scary actually is that poison attack, but other than that, he doesn't do that much damage. That cold stuff too is a little annoying, but like it's like whatever. Just don't stand in front of him. Pretty much don't stand in front of him. Especially if you just like do enough damage. It's not that big of a deal. He's kind of a fun boss after you realize like, you're supposed to actually kill the pillars. Yeah, cool boss. All right, here's Blackjaw the Remnant as well. This one's a pretty easy fight, all things considered. Once you understand the fight, just like his move set and all that, it's not like that difficult of a fight. Gives us that nice fire as it helps out with gearing later with all those negative resistances that we get. Fun fight, all things considered. Fun fight. I like that we do plenty of fizz damage though to be stunning enemies. We're actually doing a bunch of fizz and fire damage. It's actually divided in between those, but it feels pretty good. We're also pretty tanky at this point because we have evasion, armor, resistances. Like we're zooming, all things considered. Once you get that level 28 advanced, once you get that temple mall and at level 28, you're pretty much gaming in terms of gear. It's great. Here we are, Warden of the Core. This is actually a good showcase of our damage. Now, of course, like I said before, if we had Perfect Strike, we'd actually kill him a lot quicker. But that's like, I'll be honest, like, fuck Perfect Strike, dude. If you want to use Perfect Strike, go right ahead. I'm not going to use it. I'd rather just EQ him to death, to be honest. If you want to go quicker, I would just use Perfect Strike, of course, right? So, one thing I've noticed, though, in Act 3 and later on in Cruel, the game kind of becomes kind of like a boss rush in a way. It's a lot less about killing monsters and more about boss after boss after boss. And that's not necessarily bad, but it's definitely a different experience than in PoE 1, where it felt like each boss individually felt kind of special. Like for instance, Innocence felt special, Kitava felt special, but like with PoE 2, it you just end up with so many bosses after boss after boss that they kind of just become this weird soup in your head. And it kind of just like you just kind of forget about them. Like for instance, this one, it's cool. He's got a cool aesthetic, but you kind of just lose him in the sauce in terms of like what like for instance, like in Act 3, like I don't remember what bosses are there. I just go and bonk them. At this point, your build should be functioning and not having a problem. So I don't just like I remember the bosses, of course, right? I've been playing this game for like a few weeks now, but definitely loses a lot of its luster after doing it a bunch, I will say. Over the past few characters I've played, I will say that the Queen of Filth, this chick, she's like she used to be really frustrating, mainly because her rolling slam like does a decent amount of damage. I wish our rolling slam did that much damage, by the way. But as I've done it more and more and more, I've gotten to the point where my gear just kind of out checks her. Like I just end up with good enough gear that her mechanics don't matter. And like there, I almost died, but that's because I'm just being dumb. But I've noticed that like eventually, with a lot of the bosses as well, they end up just not living as long because you just end up knowing what you're doing in terms of the game, right? Like it's kind of obvious that this was going to happen, but the bosses lose a lot of their luster when you're like killing them very quickly, right? Now, this is where I realize that it's probably time to go do my Sanctum. That's mainly because we're about to do Viper and Utzel and like the rest of Act 3. And Utzel is such an annoying area that like I'm like, ugh, I really want my Ascendancy. Unfortunately, we're going to be going Titan. And this means that our first two Ascendancy points, if we want to go for the passives increased effect node that Titan is known for, uh, that means that we usually would grab the extra carrying capacity. But thankfully, I found with this specific build, it's completely fine to go with the 20% chance to Aftershock, as that's just 20% more damage early on, especially when you don't have that much chance to Aftershock. And it leads to your clear feeling just a lot better, and your single target feeling a lot better too, because you're earthquaking more, right? So yeah, we're finally doing Sanctum. Now, for the reason why I wait to do my Sanctum till later is because I just don't want the stress involved, man. Like, you could easily do it on level, but is it really worth the brain cells you'd lose from accidentally losing a run and wasting time? Why not just like wait, just maybe like a few levels and then just delete the boss like this? Like, I don't know. Like, I've talked to my friends about it a little bit. It's like, the ascendancies don't give enough power now that they merit instantly going for. Now, of course, this might change ascendancy per ascendancy, but for Titan, like I'll be honest, you can kind of chill for a while until you like actually need your ascendancies. Like I feel like you don't need it like early on. All right, so here's Kazuli. This is like where the power of Earthquake finally starts feeling good. At this point, I think I have like 38% chance to Aftershock on the tree and the Ascendancy. And that's like when things start really popping off, when you get extra Aftershocks with Earthquake. Later on, we actually utilize Tremors as our tier 3 support, as Tremors just gives you a butt ton of damage on single target. But early on, we just use the Aftershock support on top of course, the Aftershock on the tree and Aftershock from our Ascendancy. And that just leads us to being able to burst down like being able to just do a large amount of damage very quickly. The only problem is there's a little bit of setup time with it because you want to, of course, place your jagged grounds in the way that I was like talking about earlier, where you need to make sure they're in different places. Otherwise, you'll lose damage. Like right there, I just lost an earthquake attack because I didn't place it properly. There, I was able to place it in the right spot. But eventually, in the late game, what you can do is you can kind of like tune your attack speed to the same amount of duration that you'd lose on earthquake. Like for instance, if my attack time is like 1 second, I would want my duration of my aftershock to be 1 second, right? Of course, that would require a lot of effort and investment, so it's not really worth it to do it exactly to that like manner. But there's like things to do with it. Now here we are in Utzel. Utzel is just really obnoxious for like any build in general. Uh, it's just not comfortable, mainly because just enemies do very, very, very large amounts of physical damage in general. It's just physical damage after physical damage after physical damage. And on top of that, there's like a little bit elemental, but mainly it's physical damage. And that's where like all of the evasion comes in, because it turns out if they can't hit you, you can't die to like, physical damage. And that makes it feel a lot better. Now, something that's weird is I don't know if I've gotten better at running the zone, but Utzel feels smaller than it did on day one. I think it's because they reduced the size of Utzel. I'm not entirely sure, but it feels like they reduced the size of it since the day one. But that might just be me getting better. But essentially, you want to hug the right wall, and you want to like make sure you're going right every single time. Like you want to go like right in the upper right corner of the map. That's like generally where you'll find Viper. So now, of course, we have Viper. Now, Viper is an interesting fight because I've noticed if you stun lock her multiple times in a row, she'll kind of bug out and do specific attacks in a row. Like, for instance, if you're familiar with what's his name, the one dude, the Searing Flame dude in PoE 1, where he does the fires of 1,000 suns, like Searing Exarch, right? When you do him, if you do certain amounts of damage to him, it'll automatically trigger a phase where he does the balls. And I think Viper has that same thing going on, where if you do enough damage to her, she'll immediately trigger all of her dudes to start doing the poison attack. Because I've noticed that if you do too much damage to her and you stun her at the right moment, she can end up doing that little dude dance thing, like the Viper dude, like all the poison and all that. She can do that multiple times in a row, and it's just flat out fucking obnoxious. But Viper, all things considered, was pretty easy for this character because you just go bam, 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 and she dead. It turns out EQ is pretty okay, all things considered. Don't really need perfect strike, totally. Now, if I remember correctly, at this point in the campaign, I had a little bit of rarity gear. So I had a choice between running some rarity gear and running gear that had res on them. And I'll be honest, at this point in the campaign, I just went with rarity gear. That's because getting a better weapon is so absurdly important that I would cut like 20 to 30% res just to have a little bit of rarity, just to make sure that you get enough currency to craft a weapon. So I would keep that in mind as you're leveling. Like keep rarity pieces, if just generic rarity pieces. If you feel like you're doing well enough in the campaign and you're not like squishy or anything like that, put on rarity pieces, even if it was like a detriment to your character's tinkiness, because it's way better for the future to have a bunch of extra exalts in your pocket and stuff like that, so that when you do want to upgrade your weapon, when you're able to, of course, it feels a lot better. It's like a nice little tip I found. It's like literally just rarity in the campaign is really good, like in general. Speaking of, make sure to check your vendors in general. Check your vendors. Vendors, I'll be honest, most like right there, you see that? Yeah, that helmet I just saw with the life on it. Of course, I have a rarity one. I'm like, should I run rarity or life? Oh, I end up running the life helmet. But generally, in general, check the vendors, dude. Literally make sure you're selling enough stuff in terms of gold, and check your vendors, because you can find items like that literally give you 100 extra flat life. I go from 700, like 800 to 900. It's like, it's so good to actually get that much. It's great. Doriani wasn't really that special in general of a fight. Is like you just walk around, do EQ, do EQ, do EQ. At this point, we have good enough gear thanks to our rarity stacking and stuff like that, that like we can just simply do enough damage to Toriani that it's not that big of a deal. I did have him bug out on me one time where like he didn't like do the slam properly and he caught me off guard. But other than that, I didn't really die to him much. So I'm just gonna let it play, like I said before, so you guys can see like what it feels like right now at this point in the campaign with this build. Now that we've done the majority of the campaign already, how do I feel about the build? I think it's fine for the most part. I think that you could squeeze in Perfect Strike for a little bit more single target TPS. I've seen a few setups where you do run it and like it does lots of damage. It's just the problem is you have to do that perfect window thing. And I don't really like that, especially when you're like doing bosses, but like I guess you just wait till they're stunned. That's like one thing you could do to improve the character. Another thing that you could do to improve the character is just make sure that you actually do have evasion. I can't stress this enough. Just evasion while leveling is just so really strong because it's like it feels great not actually getting hit. Also, as well, life on kill in the campaign like just made my life so much easier. It's just, oh god, life on kill was so great. Those are how I feel about it. Now, one thing I will note, now that we're in Cruel is kind of weird. Cruel is like the later half of the campaign for Path of Exile, where every single zone is much quicker, everything's much quicker, like bossing's much quicker. And you don't end up spending nowhere near as long in Cruel than you did in Normal. That's because you just have access to tools that make things quicker, makes your clear better, your damage is better. Like for instance, here, like I can bully the bloated Miller. And I think the problem is I think the game is balanced around like these early encounters are balanced around you just being a potato in terms of gearing and stuff like that early on. And when you actually have gear and stuff like that, it's not that big of a deal in comparison, right? So Cruel is a very easy, just very easy overall in comparison to the first three acts. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing kind of like an annotated thing where like we're not really going to like focus too hard on the rest of Cruel. Like I'll give some highlights here and there, but like Cruel isn't that important. It's like very quick for you. One thing to note is you do eventually get access to Hammer of the Gods, which is like the next time that like the character actually feels like anything meaningful changes for it. So let's skip through these few acts, shall we? Now here's Rust King here. He's actually a lot easier in this version of the campaign because of course, he just doesn't have nowhere near as much life in comparison to the amount of damage you're dealing in Act One, of course. Very easy boss in Act Two. Here's Asinia, of course, like I said, stay near her and just smack her down. Like I said, the jagged ground placement stuff is the most important thing in general when it comes to doing boss DPS with this build, is making sure you're not putting the same jagged ground on enemies at the same time. But as you can see, we deleted Asinia, good to go. All right, here's Draven dead as well. Like I said, make sure to play Ring Around the Rosie. Makes them way easier in general. Just ring around the Rosie with them, abuse your bigger AoE and stuff. Makes it feel much better. Now here's Lachlan as well. Same thing. Ring around the Rosie, around the little cemetery thing. Abuse your range, of course, because you're Earthquake. Really fun. Boom. Now here's Executioner as well. Same thing, literally, just abuse your range. I know it's crazy to say, but like Cruel is so much easier than normal ever is. It's crazy the difference. Here's Count Geonor as well. Like I said, just try to put as many earthquakes on him as possible. Not really a big deal, especially when you have access to actual cold res. Makes this fight kind of a joke in the second phase here. Like not that big of a deal at all. Wrathbreaker down as well, as you can see, just piling on all of those earthquakes, doing plenty of damage. Feels great. Yeah, it's such a weird kind of like feeling. Like for instance, in normal, this fight feels awful, but in cruel, it's not that big of a deal. And this is like when the game starts feeling like normal Path of Exile, like Path of Exile 1 versus like whatever PoE 2 is trying to be in comparison, right? It's just such a weird kind of like just like whiplash from going from normal to cruel. Cruel is just like so easy in comparison. And I hope it like stays that way, but like the last three acts, but we'll see what happens, right? Yeah, it's really interesting just like watching all of these fights back to back and watching how much difficulty I had in like of course act like a normal versus like now. It's so crazy just seeing the difference like back to back. So I just want to quick give you an idea of like what the build looks like while I'm clearing now. Now that I have like a little bit more investment in area and damage, it just feels a lot better when you actually have those investments in damage and clear. And I think I actually invested in some reduced skill effect duration on the tree finally as well. Just such a night and day difference in comparison, right? Between I think this is also when I started actually scaling attack speed on the tree. That's actually a really good tip. Turns out you really want to scale some attack speed. This is very important because, like, what's the point in feeling like a stinky slow slam build when you could feel like a lot better by like socketing in martial tempo in your earthquake while clearing, and of course, putting skill speed on the tree. It just feels so much better, and it feels like self help. You know, you have like a grody room and you're like, oh, you should make your bed and stuff like that. It feels like making your bed, making sure that you have enough attack speed that you don't want to like off yourself. Like it's great. Like having like a 0.7 attack time with like earthquake versus like other skills where like other slams where you end up with like maybe a 1.5 second attack time. It's definitely worth not hating yourself and actually putting some investment into attack speed. Of course, we gotta finish the abortion that the water goddess started. You know, just a casual medical procedure here. Nothing to see here, of course. So this is a fight that I actually want to showcase. That's because this is like around when you get access to your your tier 3 support gems. This is like when you get access to Tremors. Tremors is a very interesting support gem. The way it works is as a chance to give you one additional aftershock, a chance to do two, and a chance to do three. Now, these are individually rolled, so you can actually end up with an earthquake that aftershocks like 5 times in a row. And if you do the math on average, this is a support gem that gives you like 100% more damage. Now, the problem is it comes with a cost. That cost is your upfront earthquakes. So your earthquake will have 35% less damage, but you end up essentially doing like 2 times as much damage because of that. It's like weird. It's definitely worth it. This is also when we get access to Hammer of the Gods. And, you know, if you've been playing PoE 2 and no warrior at all, Hammer of the Gods really needs no freaking, what do you call it? No introduction. Hammer of the Gods is just really, really, really good. Now, I will suggest do not run Tremors while you're clearing. It is not worth it because you end up just making your clear feel way worse. Tremors is, in my opinion, for this build specifically, a single target support only, and you want to swap it out when you can. Like, it feels great on single target, but for clear, it feels absolute dog shit because you're trying to run through the map, but you're not waiting for like 50 billion aftershocks to kill things, right? It's not a very pleasurable experience to try to run aftershocks while clearing, I noticed. It's actually funny. I was like reviewing the footage again, and I realized that I actually did this guy in the first try. Other bosses, every so often, I might have to do them like twice because, bullshit or whatever. But this boss I actually ended up doing on the second try. That's because of Tremors. Tremors is crazy. As you can see, you just end up with just so many earthquakes. It's just kind of hilarious to watch in general. Like, even without Hammer of the Gods, later on, as you'll notice, Earthquake ends up doing surprising amounts of damage in the end game once you have the tremor setup on single target. Like, it feels great when you trigger the crazy like 7 aftershock triggers or whatever. It just feels great. Okay, we're back with the Diddler part 2. I just wanted to show this because there's a really nasty Hammer of the Gods I land here. So fucking good with that aftershock going off. And to give you an idea of the difference between how you feel in cruel and like normal, the dreadnought on normal versus cruel is like the difference between drinking sludge from the bottom of a truck that's been driving for 20 hours versus just drinking a nice Dasani. It's like such a nice breath of fresh air to go through the zone after being punished by it early on. You get access to supports like cannibalism, giving you like 4% life on kill. It's such a big difference that like it's not even funny, man. And like just rewatching the footage, it just makes me hate how obnoxious the first version of of the Dreadnought is versus this version where it's just like this is like Weenie Hut Juniors in comparison to the old Dreadnought, like in Act 1 or Act 2, I mean. And of course, here's Mr. Abomination himself, getting stunned and dying pretty much. Very fun. Like I said, just so much easier in comparison. And I think part of it actually is the amount of fizz percent leech that I have on my gloves and my weapon at the current moment. I think that helps a lot, just having any amount of leech, because Hammer of the Gods comes down and all of a sudden you're at full life again. It's great. I'm going to skip the majority of Act 6, mainly because it's not very eventful, but I do end up going back and doing my Trial of Chaos. I do it first try, and we get access to our increased passive skills, which gives us a large boost in damage and survivability. One quick tip though, make sure you have enough gold to unspec out of the aftershock nodes inside, of course, Titan, and then spec it into the chest node, and then spec into the increased passives node, because otherwise what will end up happening is you get your ascendancy points and you're just like, what do I do with these? And then like you're sitting there awkward. It's kind of annoying, but whatever, just make sure you have enough currency for it. Now, of course, here's Viper in Cruel. So she goes down pretty quickly, all things considered. She does, like I said, force herself into phases once you do enough damage to her. And I do have to like walk around a little bit, which is annoying, but mainly just trying to make sure that we're actually placing down our EQs and making sure she's in range of them for tremors specifically. Whenever you get a tremor proc, it's like godly. It feels so fucking good when you get a tremor proc. It's like night and day difference in comparison to here. Like here, we're forced into another phase, waiting for her to get done being, yada yada yada, waiting for her to finish here, yada yada yada. It's really annoying that this happens, but whatever. Of course, we can just hammer of the gods her to death, and we're good to go. So here is our fight with Doriani and Cruel. Just like I did for all of the normal act bosses, I'm just going to show you the whole fight in whole, just to give you an idea of like what kind of damage we're working with at the end of the campaign in SSF. Just to give you an idea, this was after, I think, 14 hours of total playtime, give or take, might be a little bit more. Our Act 1 took an hour and our Act 1, our Act 1 took an hour and 30 minutes. Our Act 2 took 2 hours and 20 minutes. Our Act 3 took 3 hours because fuck that act. And then Cruel took like an extra maybe 6-ish hours to a total of 14 hours of playtime in total, which really does not feel that bad. Obviously, if you play PoE 1, that sounds atrocious, but that's just because the new campaign in PoE 2 is just a lot of walking in general without that much access to movement speed. So I'm going to shut up now. Have fun with the boss fight. All right, this is where the deets come in. This is our first map. Now, I made a lot of different changes to the build very rapidly. So I'm going to list them off here in kind of a list here. So early on, we had no resistances. This is gameplay where I had 0% resistances across the board. I I pretty much had res cap by the time I was in tier 10 maps, to give you an idea. So don't feel bad if you get to maps and you have no res. It's just normal. It's like whatever once you get to white maps. Okay. That's the first thing. The second thing is, how long did this part of the process take? Like me mapping. I think overall it took me maybe fuck. I would say 10 hours in total to go from white maps to red maps, mainly because I kind of got screwed over in red maps because I kept doing Vol Factories, which if you don't know, Vol Factory is bugged where you don't get the map drops from him currently, the boss from it, meaning that I wasted actually a few T14s, I think 2 of them accidentally, by accidentally putting it in Vol Factory. So that ended up increasing my time significantly. So if you're luckier, if you end up doing it better, you can actually get to red maps way quicker. Speaking of that, I would make sure while you're doing maps and stuff, make sure to focus boss nodes, save your boss, your big maps, your tier, your higher tier maps that you have, save those for boss nodes, and then you use your lower shittier waystones on the other maps. This is very, very, very important because it ends up giving you a way to leapfrog and waystone progression. And make sure you're also completing the missions on the side, like Cataclysm's Wake there, make sure you're finishing those. That is important. That is so important because there's a lot of nodes on the tree that give you waystone drop chance and increased chance to upgrade waystones. You also get access to precursor tablet drop chance, which is important as well, as precursor tablets allow you to juice up your maps with irradiated and stuff like that. Because if you do a map with a boss and you get a +1 on that zone, it counts as +1 in terms of item level, so they can drop a much higher tier map. So like for instance, you can have like a tier 13 map drop a tier 15 map or something like that, right? If you specifically go for irradiated stuff like that. So getting the plus levels on the zones is so supremely important. But yeah, that's what we did. Got res. We did a bunch of maps. Now, another thing is the clear on the build looks a little Pepega. There's a few reasons for that. I'm still on a 200 flat weapon. To give you an idea, that is the lowest of the low. Like, this is probably the shittiest weapon you could probably ever have, like 250 flat maybe. By the time I got to tier 10 maps, I got a 300 flat weapon by this time, and it was like okay, but it was not very good at all. Like, my weapon was really bad, and then eventually I upgraded to like I think like a 400 450 flat weapon, and that made me feel like so much better. But like I said, improving your weapon's very important. In terms of that, tips like that is make sure to look at items on the ground, like white items, and put them in a dump tab or just a tab in general. Like for instance, two-handed maces, make sure to put a bunch of them in tabs and then pull them out when you have enough transmutes and augs and stuff and regals to start crafting in bulk. Because what you want to do in SSF for crafting is you want to craft in bulk. You don't want to craft one hammer on the ground every so often. You want to craft 10 hammers in a row, because you want to be able to bulk make a bunch of them, because you're playing the long game in terms of RNG, right? So that's another thing. So we are going to be improving our clear soon, as you'll see, as there's interaction that I was not aware of later on. So here's our first map boss. Unfortunately, it's the fungus behemoth, which is like not necessarily the boss you want to be dealing with when you're playing a build where you put down a duration based skill on the target, or you're trying to hit with your Hammer of the Gods. I actually miss with Hammer of the Gods there. Really funny. You can laugh at me if you want in the comments, but like in general, like don't miss your Hammer of the Gods with this guy. This guy is definitely the worst boss to showcase this on. But here, as you can see though, as we get the tremor proc with our earthquake, you end up just with so many aftershocks. You end up with so much extra damage because of that. Now, of course, our damage is a little Pepega, but that's because, like I said, we get to white maps. I was rushing a little bit in the campaign, but like overall, if you actually hit your Hammer of the Gods, it helps you actually it helps you immensely early on, Hammer of the Gods in general, because it carries you in that weird portion where your earthquake isn't doing as much damage as you want it to be. So here's our first tier 2 map. Just a little bit of extra footage here, a little bit of extra clear. As you can see, we're actually building up our HP. That's actually one of the more bigger important things to do, is to build up our HP. Another thing that I ended up doing was I swapped to, eventually after this, I swapped to Wind Dancer and Armor Scavenger. You'll see later why, but mainly because it gives us more armor and more evasion while clearing. That made us feel a lot better. I also just didn't have anything to use with the spirit, mainly because I just didn't have the dexterity at the time to actually utilize Wind Dancer. So as you can see here, the Titan pack is working really well. I'm swapping out Tremors for Martial Tempo on bosses and stuff like that. So we go for Martial Tempo for clear and Tremors on bosses. Now you can actually see what our DPS looks like on a boss that doesn't move around a fuck ton. Helps a lot with this kind of build, because we kind of want to place our earthquakes down and get those tremor procs. But as you can see here, we really kind of just need some attack speed. We have the way of spamming earthquakes and stuff like that. I just need some attack speed, to be honest with you. I think it's a mistake to go for a less attack speed setup on earthquake. So it kind of is a little anti-synergistic with Hammer of the Gods in that way. But I think right now it's fine. But generally, you want to get some attack speed. Here, there you go. That's when like EQ feels really good. That's like what you want to see when you're playing EQ, and that's what you should be investing towards, is to get EQ to start doing shit like that. Now, another thing I will note, Like I said before early on in the campaign, make sure you're squeezing in rarity while you can. Of course, make sure to cap your res because it becomes very important later to cap your res. Because if you die during the boss maps that you're trying to get the really high tiers of maps with, right? You're trying to save your waystones for higher tier maps. If you die in those maps, guess what? You just lost an absurd amount of progression. Like, for instance, I think there was one instance where I went from a tier 8 to a tier 12, then to a tier 13, and then I died in the tier 14, and then bumped me all the way back to tier 7s and just running tier 7s. So making sure that your character is tanky enough first is way more important than damage. That's actually why you can see my damage not being as high in the footage, is because I care significantly more about not dying than I care about doing enough damage. It was to the point where I wanted to swap to a one-handed weapon and a shield, but I wasn't able to do that because I never was able to craft a one-handed weapon that could compete with the weapon that I currently had. I did not get very lucky in crafting. So here's a tier 6 map boss. This is our first yellow map boss. As you can see, though, we're actually scaling some rage. So there's actually some nodes on the tree that give you like plus like 1 rage or whatever. And turns out that's enough to sustain your rage on single target with this build because our earthquakes hit enough, and with tremors we just hit just enough in general to maintain like 30 rage currently. And later on we actually end up starting to consume rage with like war cries and stuff to do even more damage. But here we're doing this boss. Now this is where like scaling area is very important on earthquake when you're doing the tremor nonsense, is because when you have a boss like this that moves around a bunch, if your earthquakes have just absurd area and hit the whole fucking screen, like great. Also, by the way, here's a good example of the plus level there. As you can see, I got the +1 to monster level, and I dropped a tier 7 and a tier 8 from a tier 6 map. That's the kind of shit you want to see. That's like what you want to go for. Increased waystone drop chance is cool now, but +1 level to monster zone or +2 level of monster zone while you're going up in tiers, that's what you want to see. So here's the tier 8 map boss. We got the fungus behemoth again. As you can see there, we're actually doing plenty of damage now. That's because one tip that's very important early on, this is like a huge tip, absolutely massive tip, is once you get enough lesser jeweler's orbs and you get like a 4 link, right? You get plenty of 4 links. What you can do is you can make more copies of Earthquake and Hammer of the Gods and use lesser jeweler's orbs on them to get 4 links of them, and then corrode them with vault orbs at a chance to get a 5 link. Once I got a 5 link on my earthquake, we were gaming and it was great. It was like so much better. And as you can see, our Hammer of the Gods is finally putting in the work here. Very nice. So this is where we start getting the big brain tech. Now, I decided to put an armor explosion setup into the build. If you don't know, armor explosion is a support that makes it so that whenever you break armor on an enemy, right? In this case, these enemies, it deals an explosion in an area with fire damage based on your weapon damage, 100% by the way, and it deals it in an area, a pretty generous area by the way. Now, this is important because it just kind of increases our clears. So if you have 10 enemies around each other, you can actually do 1,000% of your melee damage instead of just like a baby like 300% like normal earthquake. And that's a lot of extra clear and a lot of consistency in clear. Now, how do we do this exactly? Well, turns out there's a node that says break 50% of a monster's armor once you heavy stun an enemy. Since Earthquake does so much damage, you can like actually stun an enemy pretty easily with a little bit of stun buildup investment, right? And then of course get benefit from the heavy stun and armor break them. Now, since it only is 50%, you need to make sure that you have over 100% increased, more like 100% increased chance to break armor, like percent chance to break armor, right? On the tree, like the percent armor break nodes. That's important because you want to get that 50% of their armor to 100%. And what's cool about that is it doesn't matter if the enemy is armored or whatever, has even more armor. It doesn't matter how much armor they have, since you're dealing 50% of their armor. And then, of course, you have that percent armor extra, right? Extra armor break on the tree. It means that you're always armor breaking them every single time, and that leads to these nice, beautiful explosions. That, on top of the earthquakes, on top of the extra aftershocks, on top of the Herald of Ash, is enough to make our clear not feel Papega. And what this also does is, since we're an armor and evasion scaling build, it gives us access to scavenge plating on top of Wind Dancer. So not only do we have like 40% evasion while clearing, we also get 40% armor while clearing. Now, one note though, since we are scaling reduced duration on our earthquake to make it feel better, you will need to put increased duration on your scavenged armor. Otherwise, it doesn't last that long per se, but you end up getting like 10 stacks like instantly every single time you break the armor of a pack and stuff. It's like great. It's just so much extra armor while clearing, and it makes your life just so much better in general. I end up feeling so tanky at this point, at least for yellow maps. Of course, there are some certain things that can still one tap you, especially if you're playing an HP build like DD stuff, but everything else doesn't feel as bad. Now, I do plan on actually improving the tankiness in the future. Now, of course, here's that same map. Here's a little bit of extra single target footage. As you can see, our Hammer of the Gods is finally starting to aftershock. Feels really good in general whenever you get Hammer of the Gods aftershock. And when you start getting actual EQ, like just the EQ, what are they called? The Tremor EQ procs. It's so great. Now here's our first red map. As you can see, we've only gotten to plus tier 4 maps with the Cataclysm's Wake thing. So that's a little annoying per se, but it's like fine. It's not a big deal. As you can see, our damage is lacking a little bit because I'm kind of like punching a little high. There's nothing wrong with waiting on doing maps so you feel like your build's a lot better in terms of damage. I felt like I didn't have enough damage here, so I really should not have done this map, but I just did it anyways, like whatever, and I got it done anyways. But yeah, definitely do not do higher tier maps so you feel like your damage is high enough, which was not high enough for me. Like the clear was like kind of okay, but it was definitely not high enough to merit doing this map. Now, here is our boss DPS on, of course, a tier 11 map boss. Now, of course, as you can see there, we're getting a few tremors here, yada, yada, yada. It feels okay, but the problem is the fungus behemoth is like going to move and like we lose a little bit of damage there, but like it's not that big of a deal. We definitely have enough damage for single target, but not enough for clear, which was kind of weird for me. But I realized after this, I keep forgetting this because it's not Path of Exile 1, it's Path of Exile 2. And it turns out enemies have innate resistances. You need fire penetration on this build because otherwise your armor explosions aren't hitting as hard as they should. So I would suggest swapping into a little bit of fire pen on the tree. That's like one mistake that I made that I would like to like go back in time and fix if I could. So here's a tier 10 boss, but I actually ended up with huge upgrades here. As you can see, there you go. This is like about when I got the 500 Fizz DPS hammer or whatever it was at the time. This is like where I start feeling like I'm doing plenty of damage. Oh, this is also when I increased my HP as well. What we did was we ended up getting a bunch of HP on our gear, got to 2400. Like I said, just lots of extra damage here, lots of extra damage. And I think this is also when I got a 5 link for my Hammer of the Gods. Now, I woke up in the morning and I was like, hey, Dread, I really want to get my 3rd trial done. So that's what I decided to do. So I picked my trial that was like level 62, 3 trial zones, and I decided to go do it. And I made sure to farm lower trials first. For relics, make sure you go and kill bosses in the lower trial zones. Mainly, the reason why you do this is to get relics, specifically relics that give you increased honor resistance, increased honor in percentage, and increased life. So if you don't know, in the Trials of the Sekima, your base amount of honor is actually based on your EHP pool. So for instance, if I have 3k life, my beginning amount of honor is like 3k. And what's interesting is there's actually relics that just say percent maximum life. So as you can see here, I'm at 3,600 life, even though while I'm mapping and stuff, I only have like 3,000 at this point. So just getting all that extra life and honor is a good idea. Here's Rattle Cage here. Of course, I'm like way over leveled for this, but I'll be honest with you. I don't understand why they would think that you wouldn't be over leveled for this shit. Like, like I didn't need my third sentencing passive at all either, by the way. It's just going to give me some extra more life right now. All right, here's the twin boss on floor 2. Like I said, I'm supremely over leveled, so this is not going to be that much of a deal at all. I get one really big hammer in, and all of a sudden they're dead. Great. Now, a quick tip though, while we're here, I would heavily suggest to look into farming lower tier maps sometimes early on. This allows you to get lower item level Sekima trials, and that will allow you to do it way easier than like the higher tier Sekima trials. So for instance, there's a huge difference between like a 65 item level zone Sekima trial and like a 75 item level Sekima trial. So make sure as you're farming those white maps, you pick up those Jin Baras in the early game, as it'll allow you to have a much easier time getting your third trial. All right, so here's our third trial. This is like the main reason why you over level the zone, to be honest, in my opinion, for the trial of the Sekimas. Mainly because, like, for instance, this boss does chaos damage. I don't have that much chaos res at this point, and I don't have that much honor scaling and all that. So, like, why stress out and try to do things on level, especially if you're not playing like the strongest build ever, anything warrior? And like might as well make it much easier on yourself. Here I just suck at this fight. I vehemently hate this fight in general, so like forgive me if I am playing the worst possible Path of Exile ever here. I really dislike this boss, but we do end up taking it in the end. Of course, this is why you get all that honor resistance, all that extra honor, just to make it so I can turn my brain off while I'm doing this. I think I was like watching some YouTube as I was doing this fight. Like I was kind of like half like distracted at the time. I also, yeah, like I just don't like this boss fight in general, especially on this build. This build, like, there you go. There's a good hammer. My problem was I didn't do a proper setup for the hammer of the gods, and that could have been much easier otherwise. Now we got our trial of the Sekimas. I went for the 15% more life. Early on, I would suggest doing this just for the life, and then later on the last trial, you'd get the aftershock chance probably. But the main reason why we are doing it this way specifically is because I need more life in general. There are things in higher tier maps that will low key one shot you if you only have like 2k life. So I actually went through my gear and I improved my armor and evasion significantly. I got like to 40% evasion and armor. That helped a lot. I just respect my tree a bunch. And I also grabbed a bunch of flat strength. Turns out flat strength is an okay scaler of HP, especially if you have Titan, where you get like 15% more life. So make sure to scale your life with this kind of build. It's okay, like I said, to sacrifice a little bit of damage just to get a little bit of life, because guess what? You are essentially playing a Hammer of the Gods build for single target. So Hammer of the Gods does so much damage that it is literally worth it. It is worth it to scrap some damage just to be able to have enough tankiness to be able to do the higher tier maps, especially as a life build, especially as a life build. All right, here you go. Here's a good showcase of the damage. It is a tier 13 map, by the way. There you go. Good Hammer of the Gods. As you can see, finally getting plenty of damage with stuff, which is one thing that's interesting, though. This is about when I started to realize that in general, my Earthquake was starting to do almost as much damage as my Hammer of the Gods. That is because I've been finally fine-tuning my tree, and I'm getting a lot better at my jagged ground placement as well. That helps a lot as well. But like you'll notice sometimes that like I end up doing plenty of damage with my earthquakes, especially like here, as you can see. Once you get like the tremors going off, like it's plenty of damage. So I think attack speed is definitely the way to go in the future with this build. Here's my first tier 14 map. Of course, it's like the worst layout possible for a build. Mire feels really bad, but guess what? we're doing it anyways. As you can see here, we actually updated our damage a little bit, and we ended up getting enough damage that like it doesn't feel terrible for clearing, but this is just a really bad map in general for this build, I'll be honest with you. But here's the boss. As you can see here, we're opening up an inventory and we're doing a weapon swap. It's so nice being able to press P and pause the game and weapon swap. As you can see, we're swapping 3 whole gems. That's because Earthquake for single target and Earthquake for clear are 2 completely different things, because we don't need armor break for single target. We need armor break explosions for, of course, clear. As you can see here, it's going to take a second to ramp up. That's like one more annoying thing about this build, is the ramp up time where the earthquakes aren't that bad. Also, I realized this boss has like really bad HP scaling in the end game, by the way. Like, this is a pathetic amount of HP for a tier 14 boss, by the way. Now, something I wanted to show you guys real quick is it's another tier 14 boss. This time it's the, Lachlan again from leveling. And I've noticed in my builds, if I have like bad fizz defense, Lachlan can like almost one tap me, especially in the higher level maps. So Willow is always a map that I don't want to do sometimes, but it turns out you can actually tank pretty well on a Titan if you just simply grab some HP. Who would have thought? I'll be honest, like, I didn't think it was gonna, like, there, like, look at that. I tanked that big fizz hit because I had some armor, I had some HP. Turns out you just need just a little bit of each to make it a lot better on yourself. All right, so this is a good example here. This is a tier 15 map of when I just got to tier 15s. As you can see here, I'm struggling just a little bit. I'm not doing that much damage. Also, as well, the realm is restarting. And the reason why I want to show you guys this, me struggling here, of course, as you can see, there's the 54% less cooldown recovery rate and the 54% elemental resistance and all that, right? The reason why I want to show you guys this is because I want to show you what a little bit of tuning can do for the build. So here is a tier 15 boss, the same map, right? This is like what my damage is like. It's very pathetic. Now it's like, oh, it feels pathetic, right? Like, why does this feel so bad? And I'm like thinking about that to myself. Oh, not only is it the cooldown, right? I'm not getting that many hammers and stuff like that. Turns out 54% less cooldown is bad. But also as well, my passive tree was not correct. I found out after this that I wanted pen. I needed pen. As you can see in the upper right, these guys have resistances, and I keep forgetting about that because as a dumb Titan, I don't have enough intelligence to actually run a curse, so I can't curse the motherfucker. So there's like a bunch of problems in that regard, and this is what it looks like when it feels bad. Of course, we got the double aftershock on that, but now let me show you what a good map feels like. So here's a little bit of a clear with the good map. As you can see, it already looks much better, and that is literally because not only do they not have resistance, but I also built in some pen. I did not know about the pen thing much because in normal PoE 1, it's not that much of a problem, but in PoE 2, it is a huge problem. It is a huge problem. Things get so much res in the late game, and normal monsters just have res. They just have res on them. So you need to make up for that with a little bit of pen here and there to make your clear feel a lot better in general. Now, this is a +2 difficulty tier 15 boss after about a day and 6 hours of playtime. This is the end of the run here. After this, I'm pretty much done. As you can see, it's a lot more damage than it was before in that last thing because of the fact that I just had pen. Pen is just such a big fucking thing here. As you see, plenty of damage in comparison to before, and it's literally just because I had no pen, the cooldown was bad, but it just feels so much better here. As you can see, it's just like so much better with just a little bit of tuning. Although I kind of like trolled myself there a little bit. I dashed out of my Hammer of the Gods animation. That is something that can happen, by the way. But whenever tremors start going, it's great. But yeah, that's the end of the run. That's pretty much it for the build. Now, how do I feel about everything overall? I enjoyed my time with it. I know early on I should have incorporated Perfect Strike to make bosses quicker until I got Hammer of the Gods. That's a mistake on my part, although Perfect Strike can go suck a bag of dicks for all I care, to be honest with you. I hate it. Earthquake performed a lot better than I expected in late game. Once you started like really investing into like the aftershocks and stuff, Earthquake ended up doing plenty of damage to the end game on end game bosses. Once you started like it started feeling a lot better because of that. Um, Now, of course, as well, Hammer of the Gods, really good. The defenses, good enough. Unfortunately, you're still going to die to DD every so often, no matter what you do right now, because DD does an absurd amount of fizz damage. The only thing you can do against that is just get more life. Like I said, though, this is about a day and 6 hours into the character. Like, I was rushing my pants off. Like, for that, like, pretty good. I was pretty happy about it. I'm sure there are other builds that are way better than this. I know I've seen Stampede do pretty well. Stampede's pretty well, but like I said, I think Earthquake's biggest like benefit is you could actually scale attack speed even on single target and have it not feel terrible. I think that is the biggest thing because you can get quality on Earthquake and get around like six like jagged patches in total, and that means that like in theory if you have like 2 attacks per second, you have 0.5 attack rate, right? You can actually have a jagged patch ground of 3 seconds total and still not run out of jagged patch grounds to make more earthquakes. And if you're attacking that fast alongside of course as well the aftershocks with tremors, you can end up with a lot of earthquakes. And I think that would be the direction I would take this character if I were to push it further, but that is going to be the end of this character. So let's go in game and talk about everything in detail and show you guys how the gear ended up at the end and also my passive tree for my Atlas. All right, here we are with the end of the character. 1 day, 12 hours. A lot of that was AFK time, like a good 6 hours or more of that was AFK time. But let us look at the gear and everything about the character. So let's go over the passive tree first, or the jewels, actually, gems. So for Earthquake, what did I end up on? For Earthquake, we got a 5-link Earthquake here with fast forward, just really good early on. Like, you really can't get away with this. I can't get away without this, I mean, early on. Armor explosion, like I said, martial tempo, and magnified effect. All of that combined means our clear feels pretty good, all things considered. Now, for single target, what we do is we actually swap to Tremors, Conk Effect, and Fire Infusion. Tremors is just a really good gem, so we just end up just doing it like this. We get rid of our magnified effect, our martial tempo, and our armor explosion for this, and you just end up with way more earthquakes with this. The attack speed is a bit lower, but as you can see, like it just feels way better. I'll just wait for some tremors to start, as you can see here in a moment. That's like when it starts feeling really good. Once we actually start scaling attack speed, it's going to feel like way better because of that. That's at least the current plan, is to start scaling attack speed if I were to keep playing this character. I'm kind of waiting for it. It's like taking a moment here. I promise it's a lot better than this. It's like literally doubles your damage, by the way. Like Tremors is such a crazy fucking gem. So yeah. Infernal Cry here. We have a 4-link with premeditation alongside Raging Cry to give us a little bit of extra rage sustain. And of course, Enrage Warcry to make our 2 attacks with our Infernal Cry to give us more damage. Great, right? Even more damage. So just lots and lots of damage. Infernal Cry itself gives us a lot of gain damage as fire damage, and that just helps out with just scaling our damage to the moon, especially even while clearing. Arrow of Ash, just for the explosions. The ignite duration is 3 seconds. It's actually less than that thanks to the reduced duration that we have, but it's like not a big deal. Hammer of the Gods, we have a 5-link on it. We have Ingenuity for cooldown recovery speed, so we can spam it. We're at about 15 seconds currently with that. We have Heavy Swing for more physical. We have Fist of War for 20% more. And then Aftershock for a chance to Aftershock on top of all of our other chances to Aftershock. And that's pretty much it for Hammer of the Gods. Of course, maybe Aftershock isn't the best gem ever. I'm sure there are better gems. But to give you an idea, we are RT. We are Resolute Technique, so we're not running any crit shenanigans, by the way. So, and if you were running crit, Inevitable Critical would be the way to go here. Then Wind Dancer. Wind Dancer just gives us a lot of extra tankiness while clearing, alongside Cannibalism for that life sustain and Vitality for just a bunch of regen. I also take advantage of the fat HP pool that we have with this. Then Scavenge Plating alongside Persistence. This just gives a lot of armor while clearing. Great. And that's pretty much it for the gems. Let's talk about the passive tree here. So here's passive tree. This is our current setup on our Ascendancy. If I were to grab 2 extra nodes, I would probably grab either Earthbreaker or I would grab probably Earthbreaker, to be honest. Earthbreaker would be the way to go. But mainly we have Hulking Form just for that 50% increased passive stuff. Like there's so many reasons why this is very strong right now. That's why we're a Titan. Then, of course, Mysterious Lineage. This is just to help us HP stack. The meta right now actually is to run a Ghost Writhe and grab a bunch of ES nodes up here and alongside the Hulking Form. But we're playing SSF and we don't really have any of that on the first day of the character now, do we? So I have to go HP early on. So yeah, for passives that are important, mainly lower skill effect duration, of course, getting all the area here, getting some extra armor here, getting all the percent damage here and all this, percent damage as well here. Eventually, we want to grab all this Warcry stuff, just a lot of extra damage. The Aftershock area is absolutely insane with this build. Grabbing this Strength Wheel not only gives us, I think, like 24, like 100 extra flat HP. Not only that, it also gives us access to Rage on melee hit. This is very important as it just gives us free Rage while we're clearing, because since with all the extra Aftershocks, it just like maintains it very easily. More percent damage here. The armor break stuff here. So because of the fact that we're grabbing Shattering Blow here, break 50% of armor on heavy stunning an enemy. This is very important for our armor explosion setup. So if we were to look up here, armor explosion, where is it? It's actually in my inventory, isn't it? Yeah, armor explosion. This is a lot of our clear. So being able to trigger this is really good alongside Shattering Blow. But because of this, we need to reach 100% extra armor break to reach 100% on stunning an enemy. So we need to make sure we grab this node, and this node. So that's 90%. And then we also grab this node, which is another 25%, while also giving us some areas. So it's convenient. But what's cool about this is we can get a massive 60% increased damage against enemies with fully broken armor and 30% and 30%. What's really interesting about these nodes is the fact that since we're breaking the armor first with our Earthquake, all the armor explosion should get the percent damage from this, which is great. We're also grabbing a bunch of strength here, just an absolute butt ton of strength, mainly because we just want to get as much HP as possible. I just thought that was the best way of going about it early on. We don't grab brute strength because I don't really need 20% increased damage right now, and I would rather not reduce my mana because there are some skills that are mana intensive with this build. More percent damage here, of course, more stun buildup. I am going Resolute Technique early on. It's not worth going crit early on day one in SSF on a build because your hammer has a 5% base crit to start out with. And to get this higher, you would need a better weapon, right? Then you would also need like Eye of Winter with Unleash. And like that would require a lot of effort just to be able to go crit and to crit some of the time. So this is to get rid of this, I would be in Trade League or like a longer SF run. But once that happens, we can actually start investing to all this massive crit chance here, all this massive crit multi, but we would need to actually have enough crit chance to merit this in the first place. So cool. This would make sense if we were like Sunder and we were trying to play Sunder with the heavy armor break and all that, right? That'd be great. But because of the fact that we don't have that much crit and don't have that much incentive to go crit, we go Resolute Technique. So over here, just some attack speed, make the build feel better, some armor and evasion nodes to give us some armor and evasion while clearing, then even more armor and evasion up through here. Eventually we will grab the increased damage here. And that's pretty much it for the passive tree right now. I might be wrong. It might be not as good as you could have it, but if you think that, let me know down below and let me know how you would change it. But that's pretty much it for the passive tree. Now let's talk about the gear. So of course, just want to let you know, this is not best in slot gear. This is just what was on the ground that I could craft on. So let's talk about it. Our hammer here, it's not the best hammer ever, but it has 500 flat damage on it. That's all that matters. Eventually, you want a better hammer than this, but I didn't feel like rolling some orbs to try to do that. Really got unlucky with that T1 accuracy there. Sucks, but just what we have to do. It's even on an advanced base, which has less flat damage than like expert bases do. So I don't know, just what we're forced to run this. Helmet here, HP, res, armor and evasion base. Make sure to go for armor and evasion bases because, like I said, you're scaling armor and evasion with this setup. Then chest here, HP, spirit, armor and evasion, res, good to go. Literally perfect. What else could you ask for? Amulet here, I got kind of lucky with this on a rarity base with increased life, maximum flat life, attributes, res. You want to get as much strength on your gear as possible on top of flat life, because that's actually how you start scaling life in the end game, is getting strength. You want to get strength because otherwise you're going to be like a potato in terms of tankiness. And of course here, ring here, I got so fucking absurdly lucky with this ring. Double res, res, dexterity, rarity of all things, and HP and flat damage. Like, you really could not go wrong with this ring, like, at all. Then of course this other ring, HP, double attribute, res, like, really couldn't go wrong with this ring either. I got pretty lucky with both my rings. And our gloves here, HP, dexterity, res, leech, even flat fizz, good to go on an armor base. Cool. This gives us a lot of extra sustain, especially on bosses, because our Hammer of the God hits really hard, which gives us a lot of leech and helps us, sustain our life. Then belt here, life, a little bit of extra flat mana, so those reduced mana like nodes don't fuck us over too hard, resistance, and whatever else we can get on the belt. Boots here, movement speed, most important thing. Doesn't matter what else your boot has on. You want as much movement speed as possible. Then we have HP, even more flat mana, and then eventually strength, res, etc. That's pretty much for that. I realized that I wasn't getting stunned or frozen that much, so I ended up going for a golden charm because we want as much rarity as possible when we're in SSF, because we want to drop good gear. And that's pretty much it for the gear. That's pretty much it for the character. That's going to be it for this Zero to Hero run. With all that being said, this has been Dread. Off to go do something else. If you need to see the full gear in the planner, there will probably be a full guide linked in the description for Mobalytics. Bye. See you next time.